What's up guys, Justin here with the FusionEssentials.com. So it's been a little while since we've done any Fusion tutorials, and so I thought that we'd do a refresh of kind of the Getting Started series in Fusion 360 so that you can quickly get up to speed on modeling in the program. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. All right, so when you first open up Fusion 360, it's going to look something like this. And so you've got a couple different areas in here that you should be aware of. So first off, you've got your file bar up above, which is where you're going to be able to like open and save your different versions right here. You've got your toolbar, which gives you access to all of your different tools, as well as some different windows in here, which we're not going to worry too much about for right now, but we will use those in future videos. Over here, you have the browser, which is basically going to show you the organization of objects inside of your model. So all of your stuff is going to show up in this list. Down below, you're going to have your history. So Fusion 360 saves your modeling history down here so you can actually step back and change and adjust things in your workflow. So say you wanted to make something longer or something like that, you could actually come back down here and change that in the timeline itself. And then this is going to be your 3D workspace, which is where you're actually going to be able to like move around, look at different things, other things like that. Now, what I wanted to do is just start you off modeling something very simple. And so in order to do that, what we need to do is we need to create what's known as a sketch. And so a sketch is basically going to be the foundation of anything that we draw or do in Fusion 360. It's basically going to allow us to set a plane or other object in here that we're then going to modify and adjust. And so what we want to do is we want to start by just creating a sketch. So we're going to click on the option for Create Sketch right here. Notice how when we do this, this is going to pop up or show these little planes in here. And notice how our grid is going to adjust based on what we mouse over. And in this case, what we want to do is we're going to draw the profile of a toolbox, just a very simple toolbox standing up in Fusion 360. And so we don't want to draw this laying down, we want to draw this standing up, so we're going to mouse over this plane right here and click on it. And so what this is doing is this is taking us into a flat two-dimensional view in here where we can start drawing. And notice that our tools up here changed based on the fact that we're now in sketch mode, right? So we were previously in solid mode right here, and you can see all of these tools for creating solid objects. The sketch tools are more two-dimensional tools that you use in order to sketch out things like your profiles, other things like that. Now, one thing to note about using tools in Fusion 360 is you can come up here and click on these different tools. That's a perfectly valid way of doing this in order to activate them. But notice how if you mouse over these, first off, you're going to get information about what the tools do, which is very helpful. It's going to basically tell you how to use the tools. But if you look next to the tool names in here, when you hover over this, notice how it shows you a letter. And so what that letter is that's the keyboard shortcut that you can use in order to activate a certain tool. So, for example, if I want to activate the line tool, I can tap the L key. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mouse over this workspace and I'm going to tap L on my keyboard. Notice how that highlights this right here, and it also activates that tool in your workspace on your screen. Now, what I can do is I can come in here, mouse over a point like this, and I can single click in order to set a point. And so when I do that, right, notice how this is starting to draw a line in my 3D space. And so when I draw the line in my 3D space, notice how this is giving me a length. And so I can either move my mouse and then click on the point that I want, the length that I want, or notice how this length is highlighted. What I can do is I can type in a value. So in this case, the value is going to be something like, we'll say that it's going to be 12 inches tall. So if I type in a value of 12, notice how this line becomes 12 inches long and it shows this little lock next to it. That means you are locked to the 12-inch dimension. Now, if I wanted this to be longer, I could just type over it again. And notice how, again, now this is going to be a 24-inch long, like this. And so I want to keep this at 12 right here. Now, one thing that you could do, by the way, is if you want to type in an angle, you can tab and then type in a value like this, right? So notice how this gives me 180 degrees. I actually don't want that, but you can use that tab key. You can do a tab or a shift tab in order to tab back and forth between these boxes. And in this case, I just want to click right here to set that length to 12 inches, right? And so now we've got a 12-inch height. I'm gonna say that this is gonna be maybe 16 inches wide. So it doesn't really matter what dimension we pick for right now. And I'm just gonna single click. Well, notice how my mouse is kind of like locking to the grid points that are in here unless I type in a value. But notice how as I zoom in, these grid points kind of adapt and get smaller and smaller. And so we can use the grid and also the way that this is kind of snapping to those grid points in order to finalize our square right here. So now what we have is we have a two-dimensional sketch that's inside of Fusion 360 that we can then use to extrude outward. Now, before we do that, before we create a three-dimensional shape in here, what I want to do is I want to draw the top part of this toolbox, right? Because we're going to have a piece that comes up top that then has like a handle on it. So notice how as I mouse over this edge, I'm getting different cursor types in here. Those cursor types mean different things because what this is doing is this is trying to inference to different points to pick up what you might be trying to do with these different points. And so in this case, what I might do is I might mouse over this point right here, and notice how it gives me the little triangle. Well, what the triangle indicates is it indicates that we are over the midpoint of this object, right? So you can use this to find the middle of something. So in this case, I want this point right here. I want to move my mouse up, and we're going to say that this is maybe going to go up 9 inches. And I'm just going to draw like this, and I'm going to draw edges from this point to this point and this point to this point, like this. Now, we have an extra edge in here that we need to get rid of, right? And so what you can do is, first off, you can hit the escape key to deselect the tool that you currently have active. And what I want to do in this situation is I actually want to come in here and I want to select this edge because I don't really need this edge. I just need this shape in here. So what I can do is I can just single click on it and hit the delete key. Notice how when I hit the delete key, that deletes out the edge that was in here like this, making this an uninterrupted shape. Well, now what I can do is I can come in here and I want to add a fillet so that we have a radius between these two edges. So I'm going to click on fillet right here. I'm going to click on these two lines, and notice how when I do that, I'm getting this little red point right here. And then you can move this up and down in order to set the radius of the fillet. So in this case, I'm just going to type in a value of, we'll say 1.5 inches, like this. We're going to hit the enter key. And so what that's done is notice how that's given us this filleted edge with a radius of 1.5, like this. And so what we want to do now is we want to give ourselves a little cutout for the hole where the dowel is going to go. That's going to be our handle. And so in order to do that, we can just come over here and we can activate the circle tool, and we can mouse over this point. And in this case, notice how we've got this nice inference point that's in here where we can place that handle. If we didn't know, we could just kind of mouse over this and we could just use the grid in order to find whatever point we want. But in this case, I'm just going to draw a circle with a diameter. We'll say it's going to be 1.5 inches. That's actually probably pretty big for our handle, but that's okay. We're going to say 1.5, like this. And so now I'm going to click off of this. Well, notice how what this has done is this has created this two-dimensional profile in here. And so that's great. We definitely want the two-dimensional profile, but now we're done sketching and we want to go into 3D. And so to go into 3D, what you're going to do is you're going to click on Finish Sketch. And now what we can do is we can hold the Shift key and drag our mouse a little bit in order to see this in 3 dimensions, right? So instead of this being in the 2-dimensional view, which you can see by clicking on the front view, you can either hold the Shift key to orbit, or you can also click and drag on this box in the upper right-hand corner. This kind of like gizmo box thing over here helps you navigate around in your 3D space, right? Notice how I can click on things like the corner in order to get a corner view. I can click on the right, the left, or the front, whatever you want in order to get into a view that you want. In this case, we're going to click on the corner right here. And now what we want to do is we want to take this sketch and we want to create a three-dimensional shape with it. And so in order to create a three-dimensional shape with this, what we want to do is we want to activate one of our solid tools. In this situation, specifically, we want to extrude the solid tools, right? So I'm going to click on the extrude button right here. Well, notice how when we do this and we're not in sketch mode, and I guess even in sketch mode, you get this little window over here. And basically it's going to give you all of the things that you can do with this, right? So in this situation, notice how it's blue, and it's basically telling us that we need to select a profile. The profile is the shape that we've created with our sketch, right? So notice how when I select this profile, this highlights and it gives me a little arrow. Well, if I click on the little arrow, notice what that's going to do, and I'm actually clicking and dragging, is it's going to extrude that into 3 dimensions. Right? And so that's not necessarily what we want. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to deselect that. What we want is we want multiple profiles. So we want this profile and we want this profile. So I'm going to click on both of these. And notice how I drag this way too far. I really want this to be a lot smaller. So I can kind of drag this back, but really what we want to do is type in a value. So in this case, right, this is probably going to be, we'll say it's going to be maybe 3/4 of an inch. Like this. So I'm just going to type in 3/4. Well, notice what this is doing is this is extruding this by 3/4 of an inch, just like this. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to click on OK. And so I'm going to orbit around this by holding the Shift key and dragging my middle mouse button. And one thing you might notice, and this is actually a setting that you should change, is you might notice that when you navigate around, you're actually having your orbit kind of like flip around on you a little bit. Right? So kind of like sideways like this. This is because you're in free orbit mode. And usually what I recommend is you go up into your preferences, you go down into your default orbit type, and you change this to a constrained orbit and click on OK. And so what that's going to do is that is going to constrain your orbit. It's going to keep it so that this plane kind of stays vertical. It's just a better way to navigate, in my opinion. So you can do whatever you want, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to do that. Now, notice how we're getting this little window up here for unsaved. And we need to save this. This is usually a good idea when you're working on something like this. So what I would do is I would click on the option for save. And so notice how you have the ability to save this. And this is all kind of saved in the cloud in your Autodesk account. And in this case, what I've done is I've created a folder for this Getting Started series. And this is going to be the first lesson. So I've created a folder for modeling a toolbox. And what we can do is we can save our toolbox in this folder. Well, now that means we can access this later, and notice how this gives us a little checkbox up here when this is saved. So now we know that this is a saved project. And so the next thing that I want to do is I want to create some walls for this, right? And so the way that we can do this is remember that we're working in 3D, but we start by creating sketches. And so what I can do is not only can I create sketches using these inference objects right here, you can also use any surface in Fusion 360 as a sketch plane. I don't think it works with like the curved planes because that wouldn't make any sense. But what we can do is we can actually orbit around here. I'm going to click on this inside face of this object. Well, what that's going to do is that's going to create a sketch on this face right here. Well, now we just want to do the same thing, right? We want to activate the line tool. We want to create a 3/4 inch line right here. And then we're going to continue up to probably about here, because that's probably the way that these are going to work, or the way that we're going to actually build these. But I'm just going to click and I'm going to fill this in like this. And when you're done, we can click on the option for Finish Sketch. And notice how we have this like individual sketch in here on this surface right here. And you can see your different sketches, by the way, over here in the Sketches window, right? So you can like toggle these on and off if you want to see them or not see them in the space. You can also come back in here and edit those sketches just by clicking on them, right? So we don't necessarily want to do that right now. We've got our sketches created. What we want to do, and I'm going to click on the little eye so that I can see this again, we want to take this sketch and extrude it into 3D. So to do that, we're going to come over here and we're going to activate the extrude tool. And I'm going to click on this object. And what this is going to do is this is going to allow me to extrude this to whatever length I want this to be. So in this case, we're going to say that it's going to be 24 inches. So I could type in a value of 24 here. Notice how you could also come over here and type in a value if you wanted to do that. So it's very easy to use from that standpoint. Now, one thing that you want to note about this though is this operation down here is really important. And so the reason that that's important is because notice how what this did right here is this defaulted to a join operation. Well, if I click on OK after we do a join operation, notice what that did is that joined my geometry of this object with the geometry of this object. That is not what I want because I want these to be in here as separate parts. So I'm going to do a Control Z to undo, and I'm going to do the same thing. We're going to extrude this to 24 inches, but we want to make sure that we select the option for new body. We're not going to worry about components for right now. We're just going to click on new body and click on OK. Well, now when I do that, I'm going to toggle my sketches off so I don't see those in here. Notice how this created two separate bodies, right? You've got the body for the end, you've got the body for the side, like this. So now we've got one object here and one object here. Okay, and so what we need to do now is we need to take this object and we need to copy it over to this end right here. Now I could come in here and draw another sketch in here, but I've already drawn this, so I might as well just reuse it. But what we can do is we can click on the option for move or copy. That's going to allow us to take an object and copy it. And so the first thing we want to do is make sure that we click on the option for bodies, and then we want to make sure that we've selected this object. And so what I want to do is I want to take the origin point and I want to set that. So notice how I can click on a point in order to set an origin point, and then I can click over here to set a target point. Now the problem with this is this moved the object. That is not what I want. What I want instead is I want to create a copy. So we're just going to check the box for create copy. Well, notice what that's done is that's copied this object over here. I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. Then we want to do the same thing with this object, right? So I'm just going to move and copy, select my object, set my origin point, set my target point, click on create copy right here, click on OK. So now we've got our different ends in here. And so what I need is I need a floor for this object and I need a dowel. And so remember, we're going to do this by creating a sketch. So I'm going to click on create sketch. In this case, I'm going to rotate down and I'm going to pick one of these base planes right here. And in this case, I'm just going to tap the R key to activate the rectangle tool, and I'm going to click on this object and finish the sketch. So now if I orbit out of here, I can take that sketch and notice how that sketch is toggled off. So we want to toggle our visibility for the different sketches on, but I just want to click on this. I want to make sure that I've picked up this face as well. And what we want to do is we want to make sure is we want to type in a value of 0.75 or 3/4 of an inch. And we want to make sure that our operation is set to new body. We're going to click on OK. So now we've created our base. Now we just need to create our dowel. And by the way, if you wanted to, you could come over here and click on these objects or double click on them, and we could just call this end 1, side 1, etc. So if you did want to keep these organized and labeled over here, you definitely can. I don't see a ton of benefit in that right now, but you can definitely do that if you want to. And actually, we don't need to re-sketch this circle. Remember, we already created this circle. And so what I want to do is I just want to activate the extrude tool. I want to mouse over this circle, and we're going to extrude it to this other end right here. So all I have to do that is I can just click on this face in order to set that distance right here. Just remember to set this to new body. Then we're going to click on OK. So now we've got our box in here with the dowel. And so we'll talk about creating plans for this in a future video, but one thing that we might want to do that might be kind of fun is might want to apply a material to this, right? Because it looks like it's made of metal right now. We'll probably make this out of wood in the real world. So I'm just going to right click. I'm going to go into the appearance option. Right, so I just right clicked on this option, and what this is going to do is this is going to give us the ability to access all of these Fusion 360 materials. And what we can do is we can click and drag them into our model. So in this case, right, I've clicked on the little download button right here in order to download the mahogany material, but notice how I can drag that mahogany material onto this object just like this. And so you can drag different materials on here if you want to. But in this case, the mahogany material is working pretty well for me. So I'm gonna go ahead and go with that. And so we'll talk about creating plans in a future video, but if you ever wanna come in here and measure a length, you can use the inspect function. And so in the inspect function, notice that there's a ton of stuff that we can inspect, but in this case, we want to click on the measure option. And what that's gonna do is that's gonna let us mouse over different things and select them, right? So say I wanted to measure between this corner point and this corner point, I can click in here. Notice how this is going to show me a distance. It'll actually tell you the distance over here as well. So if you do want to come in here and actually measure, like, okay, what's the actual dimension from this point to this point, you can use that tool in order to figure out those measurements really quickly. All right, so that's where I'm gonna end this video. Leave a comment below. Let me know if you have any questions about anything we talked about. Hopefully you're a little more confident with using Fusion 360 after we talk through this. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.